Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and Mirza Hashem, we will be learning today Daf Ayin Hey Amud Beis. We've got quite a bit of ground to cover, so without further ado, before we begin our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanesunim Batzar Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamalka Mirachem Aleim V'Yitziim Mitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira Umishibad L'Geula Hashta Bagalav Izman Kariv and Emar Amen. It's occurred to me more than once over the last several days that in that tefillah of Achenu we say Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, dry land or on the seas. Bein Bayam Bayabasha Hamalka Mirachem Aleihem V'Yitziim Mitzara L'Rvacha Ume'afela, from darkness la'ira to light. Now, usually, I think most people look at the tefillah and they just assume that afela, darkness, is kind of a euphemism for the darkness of a tzara, and ira is light, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring the light of salvation. But, like I say, it has struck me more than once over the last several weeks that me'afela la'ira nowadays has a new meaning, and that is the afela of these 350 miles of tunnels underneath Gaza. We should be zeicha that the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring everybody out. Me'afela la'ira umishibad l'geula hashta bagala v'zman kariv and emar amen. Also, our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Ariel Yosef ben Miriam Rezel and for Meir ben Chayesar. They should have a refuah shalema b'karev. Now, we pick up today on Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. We are continuing Hilchos Dvarim Anoihagim Baseudah, how we have to comport ourselves, the various halachas that pertain to a seudah. And yesterday we began seeing Siman Kuf Ayin Daled, the Din Berkas Hayayin Baseudah, the various halachas that cover drinking wine, and the berachah of Agefen on wine in a seudah. And the linchpin, the underpinning of this siman, we learnt right away in Sif Aleph, which was the aside that Yayin Shabasai Chasuda Mevarach Alav Bari Pri Hagafen. You have to make a Bari Pri Hagafen on Yayin. You don't pater the Yayin with the Hamoitzi. The Hamoitzi on the pas does not pater the Yayin. Yayin is very, very choshev, and therefore it gets a bracha on its own right. It's not considered a tuffle to the pas. And then in Sif Beis, we learned Yayin Pater Kol Mine Mashkin, that the bracha of Hagafen on the Yayin paters any other beverages that you're going to drink during the seudah. Why? Because, like the Mishnah Berurah said in Ois Katan Beis, Yayin is Rosh V'Rishain L'chal Hamashkim. It is the king of beverages, and therefore Kulan Nitfalim Loi. All other beverages are considered a tuffle to Yayin. And by the way, as we're going to see, I think at some point, this means that if you make a Bari Pri Hagafen on a fairly common type of table wine, I don't know, cream malaga, malvasia, some kind of a fairly common table wine, and then you want to make a l'chaim on a $200 bottle of single malt scotch, the single malt scotch is still considered a tuffle to the yayin. The yayin still covers the bracha on the single malt scotch. Yayin is the king of beverages, and the berachas hagafen on the yayin paters any other mashkin that's going to come. Now, we are picking up now the bottom line of Ayin Hey Amud Aleph with Siman Kuf Ayin Daled Sif Daled. As a hakdama to Sif Daled, we need to introduce the style, if you will, or the format of a typical seudah in the times of the Mishnah, the Gemara, apparently in the time of the Mechaber, maybe the Ramah as well. It was very, very common back in the day when they would sit down to a seudah. The seudah had a very formal structure. Kind of makes sense. I think as the years go by, we get more and more casual and informal. There was a time when most things were more formal than they are now. So back in the day, it was very, very common that when they sat down to a seudah, they would drink a cup of wine before the seudah. This was kind of like an appetizer. We're going to see a lashon in the Mishnah Berurah later. The Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us that the yayin that comes kaidam hamazon the wine that was drank before the seudah, was liftayach hameyayim, to open up the stomach, and velishtais, and to drink. So it was kind of like an appetizer. So they would come to sit down to a seudah, and the very first thing was they would be given a kais of yayin. So that was the appetizer, and that was called yayin shekaidem hamazon. That's the wine that comes before the mazon, before the food. Then they would serve the seudah. In middle of the seudah, they would also have yayin. So that's yayin shebesoich hamazon. That's yayin that was drank in the midst of the seudah. Now that yayin, the lashon that we're going to see later on in halacha, is that yayin came lishrois hamaychel, to wash down the food. So this was a drink. In middle of a seudah, you drink. So the common drink that they had, apparently, they drank a lot of wine. So this was yayin shebesoich hamazon. Then there was a third wine, and that's what we know in halacha, and in the Gemara in Brachas it's brought down, and that's what's called yayin shala'achar hamazon, wine that came after the seudah. What does after the seudah mean? So the same way at the beginning of the seudah, they drank a kais of yayin as an appetizer, and it was kaidem hamazon. It was before they served the meal. So too, when the meal was finished, it would be an end to the meal. They did not yet bench. They didn't say berachah hamazon yet, but the meal is over. The food is taken away. So nobody's eating anything anymore. But now they would drink a kais of yayin. And that kais of yayin was what we call in halacha and in the Gemara, yayin shala'achar hamazon. It came after the meal was finished, but before benching. And that yayin, in halacha, it says, that came lishtia uletainug. That was for drinking and for pleasure. So this wasn't like the yayin shebesoich hamazon. The yayin shebesoich hamazon was a drink to drink during the seudah to wash down the food. This, the yayin shala'achar hamazon, is more akin to the yayin shekaidem hamazon. The yayin shekaidem hamazon was something that you drank as an appetizer to bring on the appetite, to get the meal started. The appetit kommt mit der Essen. That's the yayin shalafnei hamazon. The yayin shala'achar hamazon was kind of like, I guess, like a dessert, sort of. It was something for pleasure, a pleasurable drinking. So that was not really considered to be machmas seudah. It wasn't really considered to be part of the seudah. Now, this becomes very negeya to the shaila of making a bari pri agafen on different ones of these wines, and what could pater what. What we're going to see in halacha is, if you had yayin shekaidem hamazon, the yayin shekaidem hamazon could pater both the yayin shebesoich hamazon and the yayin shala'achar hamazon. Why? Well, the yayin that comes kaidem hamazon is more chashuv than the yayin that comes besoich hamazon. The yayin besoich hamazon is a drink that you're drinking as part of the seudah. It's to wash down the food. It's not chashuv that you're drinking it for the chashivas of it itself. You're not drinking it, so to speak, because you want that cup of wine, for the pleasure of the cup of wine. You're drinking it kind of like you would drink water. You're washing down your meal. So the yayin shekaidem hamazon is considered more chashuv than the yayin besoich hamazon. Now, we're going to have to talk also about das. This is assuming that you knew that you were going to drink yayin besoich hamazon, you were expecting to drink yayin besoich hamazon. So then the bari pri agafan on the yayin shekaidem hamazon is capable of patering the yayin shebesoich hamazon. It's also capable of patering the yayin shala'achar hamazon. Why? Because it's similar to the yayin shala'achar hamazon. Both the yayin kaidem hamazon and the yayin la'achar hamazon you're drinking them for themselves on their own. They're not part of the seudah. So again, if you make a berachah agafet on the yayin shekaidem hamazon, and you know that there's going to be coming at the end of the meal, yayin shalachar hamazayin, so that borei pri hagafen on that first cup of wine, kaidem hamazayin, could pater everything. It'll knock off the yayin shekaidem hamazayin, the yayin shebesoich hamazayin, and the yayin shalachar hamazayin. The yayin shebesoich hamazayin, let's say you didn't have yayin kaidem hamazayin, so you didn't make a borei pri hagafen. Now you started the seudah, and you're taking a drink of wine, so you have to make a hagafen. The yayin besoich hamazayin cannot pater the yayin shalachar hamazayin. Why? Because it's not choshev enough. Even though you know that wine is going to be coming, it doesn't have the chashivus to be able to pater the yayin shalachar hamazayin, which is a very interesting concept. Because over here, you're making a borei pri hagafen on a cup of wine. You know that there's going to be another cup of wine coming at the end of the meal, and yet the hagafen on the yayin shebesoich hamazayin does not pater the yayin shalachar hamazayin. Why? The yayin shalachar hamazayin is more chashuv. It's more chashuv, and it's a standalone drink, and it's not part of the seudah. Therefore, the berachas hagafen and the yayin shebesoich hamazayin does not pater the yayin shalachar hamazayin. Now, this took a good 11 minutes to cover, but at the same time, it's the underpinnings of much of we're going to learn. And now that you have this basic understanding of the format and the underpinnings of the halacha, we should be able to move through it rather quickly. So, against that backdrop, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, Siman Kuf Ayin Daled Sif Daled, says the Mechaber. Im kava lishtois lifnei hamazayin, if you sit down to drink wine before the seudah. Now, right away, let's take a look over here at Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Vav. The Mechaber chose to use the words im kava lishtois. Sounds like there was some kind of a kviyus. Now, when we talk about being kaveya al hayayin, that usually means that you're drinking bechabura, you have 2 or 3 people that are drinking wine together, or if you're drinking alone, you're going to have at least 2-3 drinks of wine. That's not what it means here, says the Mishnah Berurah. Ois Katan Vav im kava kasva achronim talav dafka kava. Over here, the Mechaber was not being meduyik. He doesn't mean bedafka that you were kaveya al yayin. Even if you're just drinking 1 cup of wine before the seudah, so you weren't kaveya al yayin before the seudah, it's the borei pri hagafen that you make on that 1 cup of wine without kviyus before the seudah is going to pater the yayin shebesoich hamazayin. Now, very important, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chol zeh im daitoi lishtois gam besoich haseudah. When we speak about the borei pri hagafen on yayin kaidem hamazayin, patering yayin besoich hamazayin, that's not in a vacuum. That's, in the words of the Mishnah Berurah here, im daitoi lishtois gam besoich haseudah. If when you made the berachah borei pri hagafen on the yayin kaidem hamazayin, you had das that you were going to be drinking more wine besoich hamazayin. Now, it doesn't say here, by the way, that you had to have das to pater it with the berachah, but you knew that more wine was coming besoich hamazayin. Your das was, there's going to be wine coming besoich hamazayin. Now, we have to see 2 Sharet Tzionis over here. Sharet Tzionis Katan Yud Beis and Sharet Tzionis Katan Yud Gimel. The Sharet Tzionis Katan Yud Beis says, where does he get this from? That it's only true if you had das, that you are going to be drinking yayin besoich hamazayin. Tosfos Perek Ketzad Mevarchi B'Rosh Divrayim. This comes from the beginning of a Tosfos in Masechtas Brachos Mem Beis Amud Beis. V'chein Tosfos B'Psachim Daf Kuf Amud Beis. Divrei Hamaschel Yidei Yayin B'Soif Divrayim. At the end of the Tosfos in Psachim. Okay. However, Misoif Divrayim B'Ketzad Mevarchim Anal. At the end of the Tosfos that he's quoting over here in Masechtas Brachos, Mashma K'tzas, Tosfos is mashma, the besoich seudah, that in middle of a seudah, Adam ragil lishtois. It's very common for people to drink wine in middle of the seudah. And therefore, even in min hastam, you didn't have das when you made the hagafen. Oh, I'm going to be drinking wine besoich seudah. No, you weren't thinking about it at all. But it was very common to drink yayin besoich seudah. Therefore, the default is that you were expecting yayin to come besoich seudah, and therefore the hagafet on the yain kaidem seudah is going to pater it, even though you didn't have beferish das. V'chein mashma mirosh psachim berek baser siman ayin cham da'afilu b'shahaya rak yayin lefonov, even if there was just a bottle of wine on the table and you weren't thinking about it. Mistama daiter lazeh, the stam das is that you were expecting wine to come, and therefore the bracha on the yayin kaidem hamazon paters the yayin b'soich hamazon. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, Soif Dvarav, the closing words of the Rosh, Soiser Tzas Lazeh, seems to contradict this, Ayin Cham. But then, the next Aruch HaShulchan, the next Sharetzion, says the Sharetzion is cut in Gimel, B'Shulchan Aruch HaGraz Paisik, the Graz Paskins, De B'Makayim Sheregilin Lishtais Yayin B'Sai Chasuda, in places where that's the Regilus. They always drink wine b'sai chasuda. Afilu mistama amrinan ki'ilu hayadaitay lazeh. Then min hastam, since the regilus is to drink yain b'sai chasuda, even if you didn't have beferish das, you pater the bracha on the yain kaidem hamazon paters the yain shalakar hamazon ki pasak kemaskanas hataisis anal bebrachas, because the Graz Paskins, like the end of that Taisvis that the Sharetzion brought down earlier from Perek Ketzad Mevarchim in Mesechtes Brachas. So here we have a very interesting situation. The Mishnah Berurah says, when is it true that the Hagafad on the Yayin Kaidem Hamazon is going to pater the Yayin Shebesoich Hamazon? That's true if you had Das. But down here in the Sharetzion, if you ask me, the Chavetz Chaim seems to be Machriya, like the Graz. And that is that if you're in a place where the regilus is to drink yayin b'sayich hamazon, then the yayin kaidem hamazon is going to pater the yayin b'sayich hamazon, even though you didn't have das. You didn't think about it. You didn't think that, I'm going to drink wine during the seudah. Doesn't matter. Since that's what's common, since that's your regilus, you always drink wine during the seudah, so the yain kaidem hamazon is going to pater the yain b'sayich hamazon. Now, where is this going to come back to us? Right? That's what everybody's wondering. This is not the format of our seudas necessarily. Where is this going to come back to us? It's going to come back to us, but again to Kiddish, which we'll see shortly. Okay, now let's go back upstairs into the Mechaber. So the Mechaber said, "B'kava lishtais lefnei hamazon, ein tzarich levarach al yayin shebesoich hamazon." You do not have to make a bracha on the yayin shebesoich hamazon. Why? The yayin shelefnei hamazon poitroi, because the bracha that you made, the hagafet that you made on the yayin kaidem hamazon paters the yayin shebesoich hamazon. We did Mishnah Berurah's cotton vav. Now let's go to Mishnah Berurah's cotton zayin. Shebesoich hamazon, turning to ayin hey with beis. V'hu adin nami. The same halacha applies. Not only does the bracha of hagafet on the yayin kaidem hamazon pater the yayin besoich hamazon, v'hu adin, says the Chavetz Chaim, the pater nami yayin shala achar hamazon. It also is going to pater the yayin shala achar hamazon. That's the third wine that I told you about in my hakdama. The wine that comes when the seudah is over and they clear off the meal, and now you drink a cup of wine before benching. That's the yayin shala achar hamazon. The yayin kaidem hamazon will pater that yayin as well. V'huadin, the pater nami yayin shala achar hamazon kaidem berkas hamazon. That wine that you drink before benching. Says the Mishnah Berurah in the brackets. When is this true? B'makayim sheregilin lishtais yayin achar gemar achilasa. That's true if it's normal for them to have this cup of wine, this yayin shala achar hamazon. Why? Because then the expectation when you made the hagafan on the yayin kaidem hamazon, you were expecting that there's going to be yayin shala achar hamazon, because that's what's commonly done. Or if it's not in a place where it's common to have the yayin shala achar hamazon, you had beferish das. You had das. I'm gonna drink yayin shala achar hamazon, and I have it in das now when I make the hagafet on the yayin kaidem hamazon. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say you didn't have this appetizer of the yayin kaidem hamazon. Im loy hoya lo yayin liftei hamazon. And all you had was yayin shebesoich hamazon. You had yayin in middle of the meal and yayin la'achar hamazon. Does the hagafed and the yayin besoich hamazon pater the yayin la'achar hamazon? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Aval. If you didn't have the appetizer of the yayin kaidam hamazon, berachah yayin shebesoich hamazon, so the hagafa that you made was on yayin shebesoich hamazon, tzarich levarich shenis, you're going to have to make a second hagafen al yayin shela achar seudah, on the yayin la'achar hamazon. Why? Very interesting. Ki yayin shebesoich hamazon, because the yayin that you drink besoich hamazon in the middle of the seudah, einoi bar rak lishrei samachal shebemeyav. That's only as part of the seudah to wash down the food. The einoi chashuv liftar hayayin shela achar hamazon. It's not chashuv enough to be able to pater the berachah shela achar hamazon sheba l'shtia u'l'tainug. The yayin that you drink la'achar hamazon is a standalone drink. It's something that you drink l'shtia, to drink, u'l'tainug, for pleasure. That's more chashuv than the yayin shebesoich hamazon. And the yayin shebesoich hamazon cannot pater it, which is such a fascinating concept. Because it's the same min, they're both wine, it's the same bracha, and yet it can't, it's like, I want you to imagine for a minute, if we had such a concept, that if you make a borei mina mezainos on a piece of sponge cake, it can't pater the borei mina mezainos on a piece of, wow, that fancy company just escaped me, Shook in Lakewood. You get one of those $200 Shook cakes in Lakewood, the custard cakes. So the mezainos on the sponge cake can't go ahead and pater the mezainos on the Shook cake because it's not chashuv enough. Now over here we're not dealing in the chashivas of the wine. We're dealing in the chashivas of why you're drinking the wine. That's the answer. The answer is that the berachah that you made of agafin on a yayin that is coming as part of a seudah, lishreis ha'maychel shebemeyav, to wash down the wine, that cannot pater a drink of wine that you're drinking as a standalone drink, l'shtia u'l'tainug. It's two different types of drinking, and therefore this bracha cannot pater that one. Very interesting. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'ayin bebeis Yosef, take a look at Beis Yosef Shekasav, who writes, let's say it comes to the end of the seudah, right? He's talking over here now again about the yayin shela achar seudah. And what's he saying? He's saying that the bracha on the yayin shebesoich seudah cannot pater the yayin shela achar seudah. Now he wants to qualify exactly what does this mean, yayin shela achar seudah. The way I described to yayin shela achar seudah, you came to the end of the meal is over, they're clearing away the food. Now, before benching, you're going to drink a cup of wine. Says the Mishnah Berurah, take a look at the Beis Yosef. Shekasav, who writes, if the end of the meal comes and they clear away the food, but you're still thirsty from the meal, even if a lot of time has passed since the end of the seudah, afal pikein, as long as you didn't bench, whatever wine you're going to drink now is still considered yayin shebesoich hamazon. Why? Because why are you drinking it? You're drinking it because you're thirsty from the meal. That's still called yayin besoich hamazon because what's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is still seudah purpose. The purpose of it is to wash down the food, to quench your thirst from the food that you ate. So this is not a standalone drink of yayin shela achar hamazon l'shtia u'l'tainug. This is seudah drinking. So even though it happens to be after the meal, after they cleared away the food, it's still yayin shebesoich hamazon. V'gam mashma k'tzas b'divrei Rashba, and the Mishnah Berurah says it's also mashma from the Rashba. The imu shoyse miyad achar achila. Let's say they clear away the food, and immediately you drink a cup of wine. To That's also still considered yayin b'soich hamazon. So what exactly is yayin shalachar hamazon? Says the Mishnah Berurah, ach be'emes, the truth is, ein din zeh motzi beinenu. This whole schmooze over here about yayin kaidem hamazon, yayin b'soich hamazon, yayin shalachar hamazon, ein din zeh motzi beinenu. We don't really have this concept, especially the concept of yayin shalachar hamazon. Yayin shalafnei hamazon we have. That's going to be Kiddish. We're going to talk about Kiddish. Yayin shebesoich hamazon we have. We drink yayin in the middle of the seudah. But this concept of yayin shalachar hamazon, yayin that comes after the seudah is over, before berachah hamazon, says the Mishnah Berurah, ein din zeh motzi beinenu. Why? She'einanu moishchin yadeinu min hapas. We don't take our hands away from the seudah. Literally, it means we don't draw our hands away from the bread. It means we don't end the seudah ad berachah hamazon. Until benching, our seudah is not over. V'choshev hakoil toich seudah, and therefore, whatever we do before benching, even if we're sitting around the table for an hour schmoozing, whatever we do before benching is still considered b'soich hamazon. Well, lefikach, therefore, b'meila, yayin shebesoich hamazon, poiter gam yayin shalachar hamazon. So then, yayin shebesoich hamazon, if you made a hagafet and yayin shebesoich hamazon, you pater all the wine that you drink until benching. Dezevazer lishreis, because all of this came lishreis, which means again to like wash down the food. It's all considered to have come machmas haseudah. I made a note here that there's an interesting Dirshu footnote. Yeah, Dirshu footnote number 15 brings down a Chazon Ish. Says over here, va'afilu im nishta harbe b'soif haseudah. Even if, like I said, you sit around the table for an hour schmoozing after the seudah, v'shoises hayayin machmas sheni etzameh, and now you're thirsty, you take a drink of wine, kasav Chazon Ish kol shalibirach berachas hamazon, as long as you didn't bench, einoi tzarich levarach alav, you don't have to make a bracha on another cup of wine. It's all considered yayin shebesoich hamazon. Okay, now, like I said, where do these halachas really come back to us? Really, they mostly come back to us, but negeh to Kiddish. So let's see what the Mechaber says here. Top line, ayin hey amud beis. V'chein, similarly says the Mechaber, yayin shel Kiddish, the yayin that you drink for Kiddish, poiter yayin shebesoich hamazon. It's going to pater all the wine that you drink during the seudah. So, Shabbos by day, you come home for the seudah. What's the first thing you do? You make Kiddish. Now, is that really b'soich haseudah? Well, according to most minhagim nowadays, the Yekish minig is not that way. But according to most people nowadays, we first make Kiddish. Then after Kiddish, we get up, we go to wash, and we come back and we make a moitzi. The true beginning of the seudah is the netilas yadayim and the hamaitzi. And the Kiddish is coming before that. So the Kiddish really constitutes yayin that's kaidem hamazon. Now what's going to come into play over here, interestingly, is why do you drink that yayin? Is that yayin an appetizer? Is that yayin like the words that the Mishnah Berurah used, liftayach hamayayim and lishtia? Is that what that wine is for? No, it's for a mitzvah. It's for Kiddish, So we're going to have to talk about that. But says the Mechaber, v'chein yayin shel Kiddish, when you make a bar pri hagafet on the wine for Kiddish, poiter yayin shebesoich hamazon. It's going to pater all the wine that you're going to go drink in middle of your seudah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kotneches, v'chein yayin shel Kiddish. What's the big Kiddish over here, says the Mishnah Berurah? Why did the Mechaber have to say this? Why does the Mechaber have to point out yayin shel Kiddish? Yayin shel Kiddish is yayin shekoidem hamazon. It's yayin that you're drinking before the meal. Says the Mishnah Berurah, like I just mentioned, no, there's a big Kiddish here. Kamash Malon, the Kiddish of the Mechaber is, don't think that it's only the normal yayin kaidem hamazon, which is an appetizer. The choshev, which is considered choshev, the ball of tayach hamayayim, because it comes as an appetizer, velishtais, and it's a standalone drink. So it has chashivas, and therefore paiter b'soich haseudah. So the yayin kaidem hamazon paters the yayin that you're going to drink b'soich hamazon. Aval yayin Kiddish, but the wine of Kiddish, deba ikroi lemitzvah, the yayin of Kiddish you're drinking for a mitzvah. You're not drinking the yayin of Kiddish as an appetizer. You're not drinking the yayin of Kiddish as a lead-on to the seudah. It's really completely separate from the seudah in a certain way. Because why are you drinking? You're not even drinking it for a drink. You're drinking it because you have to be kind the mitzvah of Kiddish. That's why you're drinking it. So, maybe you would think that does not pater yayin shebesaycha hamazon. Kamash balon the pater. The Mechaber therefore teaches me that yes, the yayin shel Kiddish is like any other yayin that's kaidam hamazon, and it paters the yayin shebesaycha hamazon. If you take a look at Dirshu footnote number 16, he says over here, ubetam hadavar. What's the explanation of this? Kosav l'kaban, he brings down a Mishnah Berurah from writer Siman Reishayin Beis of Katan Lamed Hey. Shekev ad Kiddish b'makom seudah. We know that there's a din of Kiddish b'makom seudah. Nechshav kitzarchei seudah. So the Kiddish is intimately tied to the seudah. Nechshav kitzarchei seudah shemach masabah. It comes because of the seudah. And in the Sharetzion over there in Reishayin Beis, Kasav the Chavetz Chaim writes, Shabitamzeh, for this reason, even if you follow our standard issue minig, right? SOP, standard operating procedure, where we do Kiddish before washing, so it's mamish not part of the seudah. There's no question that the Hagafen on the yayin of Kiddish paters the yayin shebesaycha seudah miberachas pri Hagafen. And I dare say that if you would look at most people and you would make the suggestion that Kiddish does not mark the beginning of the seudah, they would look at you as very confused. If you ask your kids to go set the table for the Shabbos seudah, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to put a kais on the table. Kiddish is intimately tied to the seudah. And that's why, even though it is not, you don't drink it for the same reason as the standard issue yayin shekadim hamazon. Yayin shekadim hamazon is an appetizer. Yayin of Kiddish is not an appetizer, it's a mitzvah, but it's still intimately tied to the seudah, and therefore the Hagafen on the yayin of Kiddish will pater the yayin shebesaycha hamazon. Now, continuing in Dirshu footnote number 16, he makes a very crucial point. Let's say you had a Kiddish in shul. So you were Yotze Kiddish. You had a Kiddish in shul, you drank a revius of yayin, or you ate a kazayas of mezainos. So you were Yotze Kiddish, like the Rishiv Zatzalik, Rav Moshe Zecher Tzadik L'Chadosh L'Vracha, you were Yotze Kiddish b'makom seudah. Really, you don't need Kiddish at all anymore. You go home, you wash, you take your lechem mishnah, you have your seudah. You were Yotze Kiddish already. But you're going to make Kiddish when you come home because your wife needs Kiddish and your kids need Kiddish. So you're going to make Kiddish. But now, does your Hagafen on the yayin that you're drinking now, does it pater your yayin shebesaycha seudah? Now you're not even drinking it for the mitzvah. You don't need it for the seudah. You could start your seudah without it. You're only doing it to be moitzi yenim. Says the footnote over here, Kasa b'shal sechuv shevet halevi, shenechshav ki kiddush gomer le'inyan zeh. It's 100% considered like a regular Kiddish. And yes, it will pater any yayin that you drink during the seudah, because the truth is, you still need it for the seudah. You still need that Kiddish for the seudah, because you're not going to start your seudah until you make Kiddish for everybody else. So it's still intimately tied to the seudah. Now let's continue with the Mishnah Berurah over here. Let's go back into Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Ches, right by the Ois Katan Yud Ches for the Sharetzion. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'nira li pashut. Now, the Chavetz Chaim says that what he's about to say is pashut. I'm going to tell you that it's not pashut at all nowadays. It was pashut in his time. It ain't pashut in our time. V'nira li pashut, says the Chavetz Chaim, Temebedina Seinu in our regions, She'ein onu regila lishtois yahin b'saycha seudah afilu b'Shabbos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, in our regions where we are not in the habit of drinking wine in the middle of the seudah, even on Shabbos, einoi pater. The yayin of Kiddish does not pater. The Hagafen on the yayin of Kiddish does not pater yayin shebesaycha seudah. Eli imkein hayadaita l'zeh mitchila. Unless you knew that today was a great exception, and there was going to be wine coming in the middle of the seudah. Ukamaisha kasafti b'kaidim, like I wrote earlier on Amud Aleph at the beginning of today's share, says the Chavetz Chaim, that in order for yayin kaidim hamazon to pater yayin b'soich hamazon, there has to be some level of das, at least like the rush that we learned in the Sharet Zion, the Graz, there has to be at least a level of das that the regilus is to drink wine, so you know that wine is coming. But says the Chavetz Chaim, b'medina isenu, where it's not the regilus to drink wine in the middle of the Shabbos Seudah, so you don't think that wine is coming. So then, if you make hagafan on Kiddish, and then punkt in the middle of the meal, somebody brings out wine, that's nimlach. You didn't have that in mind. So then you have to make a new hagafan. That must have been in the Chavetz Chaim's times. Nowadays, there's a tremendous regilus to drink wine in the middle of a Shabbos Seudah, right? So no, I would say not like this Chavetz Chaim. Nowadays, the berachah hagafan on Kiddish before the Seudah definitely paters the yayin shabbosaycha Seudah, because the regilus is to drink wine. Now, if you'll tell me that by your Shabbos table, it's not the regilus to drink wine, so then in the Chidami, if it's not your regilus to drink yayin b'saycha Seudah, so then, unless you know that you're going to serve wine in the middle of the Seudah, you would have to make a second hagafan. But otherwise, you don't have to make a second hagafan. Ice cut and test. So the Makaber said that the yayin of Kiddish, the bracha of hagafan on the yayin of Kiddish, paters the yayin shebesaych hamazayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut and test shebesaych hamazayin v'huadin shalachar hamazayin. And like we explained earlier, that the yayin, the berachah hagafan on the yayin of Kiddish, that's the yayin kaidam hamazayin, paters the yayin besaych hamazayin and the yayin shalachar hamazayin, because the yayin shalifnei hamazayin and the yayin shalachar hamazon share the same level of chashivus. They're both standalone drinks. Of course, we already learned the earlier Mishnah Berurah, who told us that this halach of yayin shalachar hamazon isn't negated to us nowadays. Okay, now next case. Continues the Mechaber, top line, ayin heon beis. V'chein, similarly, another case where you might make a bracha on yayin before the seudah, and it will be considered yayin that's koidem hamazayin, and it will pater yayin b'saych hamazayin. What's that case? It's going to sound like a strange case to us. V'chein hamavdil al hashulchan. Somebody who's making Havdalah at the table. So somebody went, he davened Ma'ariv, he said Atachanan Tanu, he was mavdil in his Shemona Esrei by Ma'ariv. Now he comes home to make Havdalah, and they're having a beautiful melaveh malka. You're not allowed to eat before Havdalah, right? For Havdalah, you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to even drink water. You're not allowed to drink anything. You're not allowed to have anything before Havdalah. So, okay, so what are they going to do? The wife set a beautiful table for a melaveh malka, and first, they're going to make Havdalah ala shulchan. So they're going to bring a kais, kind of looks like the Shabbos Seudah all over again. There's a kais of yayin by the table. There's also a candle. There's also besamim. And now you're going to be mavdil ala shulchan, and you're going to make a bari priagafen. And there's also going to be wine in the middle of the seudah. So says the Mechaber, v'chein hamavdil ala shulchan, if somebody makes Havdalah by a seudah on the table, paiter hayayin shebesaych hamazayin. That Havdalah, the berachah hagafan of Havdalah, is a berachah hagafan on yayin shekoidem hamazayin. And it's going to pater any yayin shebesaych hamazayin that comes by melaveh malka. But, continues the Mechaber, the yesh oimrim, there is a yesh oimrim, this is Taisvis, Shitas Taisvis, the yesh oimrim, she'ein berachas yayin Havdalah paiter. There is a Shitas Taisvis that says that the bari priagafen of Havdalah does not pater the yayin shebesaych hamazayin, elim kein notal yodav kaidem Havdalah, unless you washed before Havdalah. Now, that sounds very strange. What does this mean? You washed Netilas Yadayim, and now you came to the table and you're making Havdalah. So right away you're going to have the kasha. We learned that Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, tekif l'netila seudah. You're not allowed to be mafsik between Netilas Yadayim and Hamaitzi. So how are you making Havdalah between Netilas Yadayim and Hamaitzi? One answer the Mishnah Berurah is going to say is, wait a second. If it's sarche seudah, you're allowed to be mafsik. right? You wash the tilas yadayim, now you come to Hamaitzi and you have no salt. You're allowed to say, excuse me, could you please bring the salt? Why? Because that's tzarchei seudah. Guess what? Havdalah is tzarchei seudah. Why is Havdalah tzarchei seudah? Because you're not allowed to eat before you made Havdalah. So if you washed netilas yadayim, now you come and you want to make a moitzi and you want to eat, you're allowed to make Havdalah first because the Havdalah is necessary before you make the moitzi. It's tzarchei seudah. But the Mishnah Berurah is also going to say that notal yadav is not, it's lav dafka. It doesn't mean that you mamish have to wash. It means that you will kavei seudah ala shulchan. So in other words, like I said, you came home from shul and your wife prepared a beautiful melaveh malka. So you're now coming to the table and you're sitting down and you're starting to be kavei seudah, and the first thing you're going to do is make Havdalah. And then you're going to get out, wash the tilas yadayim, and then you're going to go wash. But you were kavei seudah. The beginning of this seudah is the Havdalah. The same way the beginning of a Shabbos seudah is Kiddish. The beginning of this seudah is Havdalah. So the Yesh Oimrim over here says, not so fast is the Hagafet of Havdalah going to pater any yayin that comes beside seudah. That's only if you make the Havdalah part and parcel of the Kviyah seudah of this melaveh malka. But if you sit down and make Havdalah by your kitchen table, and then after Havdalah, you sing Hamavdil, and then you put away the Leichter, and then you come and you shift into the dining room, and you go to the dining room, oh, let's have melaveh malka. So then the Havdalah was not part of the seudah that it should be considered yayin shekaydim hamazon. Okay. Bottom line, says the Mechaber, third line down, Hilkach, since we have this disagreement in halacha, these two opinions, what should you do lamaisa? Hilkach, hamavdil kaidim netila, if you're going to make Havdalah before your kaveya on this melaveh malka, yechavein shaloi lahaitzi yayin. If you're going to make Havdalah by your kitchen table, and then 15 minutes later you're going to go sit down to the seudah, have in mind beferish that the agafet that I'm making on my Havdalah is only for my koishel Havdalah, and I am not using it to pater the yayin that I'm going to drink by melaveh malka, so you kriach out of this machlokes. V'ayin l'kamon, Siman Reish Tzadik Tes Sif Zayin. So again, Hilkach hamavdil kaidm l'til yichav shaloi loitzi yayin, v'ayin l'kamon Siman Reish Tzadik Tes Sif Zayin, shebesach seudah. It shouldn't pater the yayin besach seudah. Ubediyevet shaloi kiven kach. What if you didn't have beferish and das, that it shouldn't pater the yayin b'sech hamazon? So again, you went ahead and you made hagafet on the Havdalah by the kitchen table, and you didn't have beferish das, that it shouldn't pater the yayin that you drink by melaveh malka. So then b'di'evid, the Mechaber paskins poiter yayin sheb'sech seudah. B'di'evid, we're going to say that the yayin of Havdalah is yayin shekaydim hamazon, even if it wasn't part of the kviyas of the melaveh malka, and it paters any wine that you're going to drink in the middle of the seudah. Why? The savik brachas, the rabban lahakal, because savik brachas lahakal. Let's remember, savik brachas lahakal means you don't make a bracha. If you have a suffix, whether or not you have to make a bracha, you don't make the bracha. Why? Because to make the bracha is to risk shem shamayim levatal. Okay, let's see how much of the Mishnah Berurah we could do over here. We should be able to do it all. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Yud. So v'chein hamavdil, the same halacha, the same sprach that we're talking about over here, of yayin kaidim hamazon and Kiddish and everything else, it applies to somebody who made Havdalah by the table. Ritzayin loymar. Again, what's the Kiddish? Why would you think Havdalah should be different than Kiddish? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Pashut. Ritzayin loymar, afagav da Havdalah ain't a shaycha klal l'seudah k'may Kiddish. Kiddish, yeah, Kiddish is the beginning of a seudah. Nobody looks at Havdalah as being part of a seudah. I feel hockey still in all. Kevin de Havdalah ala shulchan. Since you made Havdalah by the table, like I said, your wife prepared the melaveh malka, and she put the Havdalah kais down on the table with the melaveh malka. Shaycha l'seudah. It is part of the seudah. And of course, again, the Chavetz Chaim is stressing, how is the hagafet on the yayin of Havdalah going to pater yayin that comes during the melaveh malka? Because you had it in das. What does that mean you had it in das? Like the graz in the Sharet Tzion. The expectation was that there was going to be wine. Ois Cotton Yud Aleph, There is a yesh omrim she'ein berachas Havdalah, that the bracha of the yayin Havdalah doesn't pater, unless you mamish made it part of the kviyas. Hatam kanal, deina shaychel seudah, kamei Kiddish, she'ein el b'makom seudah. V'alkein sviralu la yesh omrim. That's why this yesh omrim holds the be'inan al kol panim she'yitl yadu l'seudah metchila, that you either washed netilas yadayim before you made Havdalah, or you made it part of the kviyas of the seudah. The bazeh bevadei aschalta the seudah. Ice cut yud beis yayin Havdalah kasavagin avram to dafka yayin Havdalah she'enoi bolet tzar seudah. Aval b'yayin sheliftei hamazin the alma shebolet tzar seudah liftei hamayayin pointer afilu kaidim netila. In other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, don't get confused. The mechaber is not changing his mind, or the mechaber is not suggesting now. He's not using the yayin of Havdalah as an example of yayin kaidim hamazin and saying, you should know this halakha that yayin kaidim hamazon paters yayin b'seich hamazon is only if you made the hagafet and you drank the yayin kaidim hamazon after the tilas yadayim. No. Standard operating procedure yayin kaidim hamazon always paters yayin sheb'seich hamazon. The problem is that by Havdalah, this yesh omrim does not see a connection between the yayin of Havdalah and the yayin b'seich seudah of melaveh malka, because Havdalah is not connected to a seudah. And therefore, the yesh omrim says this only works in the case of Havdalah if you make the Havdalah yayin part of the kviyas seudah of the melaveh malka. Ulahachi sasam ha'makaber b'reish hasif lehisted the dafka achenetila. Ice cut yud gimel. The words of the mechaber were that according to the yesh omrim, the yayin of Havdalah is only going to pater the yayin b'seich hamazon if you made the hagafan on the Havdalah after notal yadav, after the tilas yadayim. Says the Mishnah Berurah dafka. As long as you made the Havdalah part of the kviyas haseudah, so you're making the Havdalah when you're sitting down to be kaveh seudah for the melaveh malka, even though it's before the tilas yadayim and hamoitzi. The El Yerabah disagrees with this Magen Avram. V'chein mashma mibir agra that he also disagreed with the Magen Avram. Ice cut Yudalit koidem Havdalah. If you made the netilas yadayim before Havdalah, frek the Mishnah Berurah. Vim taimar, if you'll ask, heichi shari lahafsik ba'Havdalah bein netilas yadayim la'amoitzi. Like I said, how are you going to make Havdalah after you wash before you make the hamoitzi? What happened to tekef l'netilas seudah? Yesh loymar d'lo yavi hesek hadas. This Havdalah doesn't present a hesek hadas between the netilas yadayim and hamoitzi. Kevin shadaita lechol, because you want to sit down to eat, ve'ener rashay lechol b'li Havdalah, and you're not allowed to eat without Havdalah. Certainly, to take an optional drink between the tilas yadayim and hamoitzi is aser. Ice cut tezvav. What should you do l'maisa if you're making Havdalah before melaveh malka and you're not making the Havdalah part of the kviyus? And we're not talking about if you make Havdalah at 5:30 and you're sitting down to melaveh malka at 8 o'clock. That's not negeya. Then there's no suffix, there's no shaila that the hagafah that you made by Havdalah doesn't pater. We're talking about you made Havdalah at the kitchen table, so you didn't make it part of the kviyas of the melaveh malka, and then you're gonna sing Hamavdil, you're gonna help your wife wash the dishes, then you're gonna go to the dining room and you're gonna sit down for melaveh malka. So now you got into like a fuzzy area over here. So in that case, the Mishnah Berurah says the kriyach out of the suffix, you should have beferish das that the hagafan of Havdalah does not pater the yayin sheb'seich seudah of melaveh malka. V'az yivarech berachah achronin al kol zeh kaidim seudah. And you're gonna have to make it al hagafan if you drink a shear. If you drink a revius of yayin by Havdalah, which you don't have to do, you can drink a bali lugma. So if you drink a shear of yayin by Havdalah, you'll have to make it al hagafan on the yayin that you drink, and then you're gonna make a new bracha rishona on the yayin that you drink by melaveh malka. Wow. Okay, we didn't get quite as much. I thought we were going to finish the page, but that's me. I always miss the mark of how much we're going to accomplish. But Baruch Hashem, it was quite a mouthful. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discuss of Limud HaTorah should be making a Gal Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Hashem should send Yeshua's, Refuas, Parnasa, Cheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Gula Shlema with the BS girl Tzedek b'Meheira v'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.